Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today on Fieldwork Diaries, we're joined by Anna Bidgood. She's from Oxford University and she's a metamorphic petrologist. And today she's here to talk to us all about her fieldwork. It's really great to have you here today, Anna.
Yeah, hi, Eleni. Thanks for having me.
Would you like to start by introducing yourself and how you got into the subjects that you're studying?
Yeah, so I have to admit that when I was a teenager, I don't think I actually knew what geology was. And it wasn't until I started my A-levels and my dad said to me, "Oh, they do geology at this school. You might like that." And I went, "What's geology?" But actually, I think my true kind of passion for geology started on one of my family holidays when we went over to Iceland, and we were just driving around Iceland looking at all the volcanoes. And at one point, we were by this lake in central Iceland, and we looked at the mountains in the distance, and this is when we realised that we were actually in the middle of a caldera, and the mountains in the distance, like really far away, were actually the rim of this massive crater, essentially. We were stood in the middle of it, so that was pretty cool.
So once you decided that you were interested in geology, where did you go from there?
So I did take geology at school, and I really enjoyed it, but all through my A-levels, I still wasn't planning on studying geology. I actually wanted to do medicine for a while. And it got to, I think, the summer before I applied to university, and I was trying to write a personal statement for medicine and really struggling with it. Mm-hmm. And I thought, in the meantime, why don't I try just writing one for geology? And then came really easily, and I thought, that must be a bit of a sign. So yeah. I ended up applying to university to do geology instead.
And I should say that we did our undergrad together. And in fact, when I was doing my undergrad, I was on a bus sitting behind Anna, and I heard her going on about southwest Greenland. and I was just sat there thinking, oh my goodness, how do I? It's basically like, pick me.
I think I turned around and saw you like peeping through the gaps between the chairs, going, "Oh, can I come?" And you did.
And it was absolutely fantastic. But you've gone on to do more fieldwork after that trip, and you've been to some pretty interesting places. So, yeah, where have you been recently?
So last summer I had the first field season for my PhD, which was up in northwest India in Ladakh, so right on the border with China, which was a very new place for me because I'm usually used to going north, really. Mm-hmm, yeah. So yeah, this was my most recent fieldwork.
So what is it that you're researching out there? What are you trying to find out?
So I work on a part of geology linked to plate tectonics, and specifically I work on the India-Asia collision. So about 50 million years ago, India and Asia continents collided. But I'm looking at the process at the very beginning of that collision. So it's thought that India actually got pulled down into the mantle during this collision and then popped back up again. So the continent was subducted, which is an unusual process. And, of course, it all happened so deep down. We don't really know what was going on back then. So it's trying to pick apart that puzzle.
So, yeah, you're trying to study things that if we wanted to look at, say, the subduction zones of today and the ones that are forming now, we can't access these great depths. We can't go down there to look at them. So you're relying, aren't you, on the evidence that's back at the surface now?
Exactly, and there are different forms of evidence for what's going on down the subduction zone, but what I think is the best form of evidence, the most direct piece of evidence, is the rocks that have since returned to the surface, because they have experienced what's going on down this subduction zone and actually might preserve some of this, get locked into the minerals that we see. So for people who haven't done any geological fieldwork, what's the kind of... So if you're going out to look at these rocks and maybe collect some samples, what are the main things that you're going to be doing on your fieldwork? Yeah, no, that's a good question. So once I get out there, the main things I will be doing... So there's a lot you can do before you go, for a start. Mm-hmm, sure. The Google Earth is amazing, and you can literally fly through the field area with Google Earth.
I don't know how people managed fieldwork before Google Earth.
So that really helps to kind of constrain like my field campaign, where I want to go, and maybe some old geological maps. So what I'll do when I'm out there is I'll be looking at all the rocks on the surface,
Mm-hmm.
writing down what I can in my notebook and your camera are some of the most important kind of pieces of equipment they have.
Yeah.
And just kind of recording what kind of rocks are there and where they are,
Mm-hmm.
and if they're, dipping at a certain angle, can you measure that?
Yeah.
And from all of that, what we aim to do is piece it all together into a map of the surface, and from that we can figure out what's maybe going on underground. And then the kind of work that we do beyond that will probably need more microscale observations in the lab, but from the field observations, it's
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're so in terms of the scale of what you're looking at when you're out there, I mean, you're probably going to be looking at cliff sections, which are sort of scales of kind of meters. So you take those observations as well as the rocks that you can then put under the microscope.
Yeah, so the field area itself is about 100 by 50 kilometres, so it's pretty big.
Mm-hmm.
And there is one road that goes through it and a few 6,000 metre peaks, which I don't manage to get up. But so it's a huge area, and in order to map an area like that, you've got to look at as many different outcrops as you can. But like you say, a lot of the outcrops are just cliff sections, and within a cliff section you can get some really useful relationships, and you can actually like sketch out a cliff section and
Mm-hmm.
and figure out what unit's older than what, this kind
Yeah.
of thing. And then if you look up closer again, you'll see what minerals there are there, and then maybe even little deformation structures where this rock's been deformed or things
Mm-hmm.
like that. So you work in every scale.
Your rocks are, you said they're subducted, so they must have experienced some very high pressures as well.
Yeah, so the kind of peak estimates really for how deep these rocks went into the mantle are about 100 kilometres down
That's
into the
crazy.
mantle. That's vertically down and then back up again, which is pretty amazing. And the way we can figure this out is because when you put a rock under pressure and you change the pressures, you change the temperatures, you cause minerals to grow in response to these changes, and it's the minerals that grow that tell us about what the conditions were, how high were those pressures, how high were those temperatures.
So you've got all these exciting rocks that you're going out to find, and you've spoken a little bit about the kind of the main techniques, and in a way our type of fieldwork, our geological fieldwork, is compared to some studies, it's quite low tech in that you said all we need really is a camera and a notebook, and I guess maybe a geological hammer and a compass. But I'm guessing that fieldwork in your study area in the Himalayas, that you need some extra bits and bobs along with that. So what kind of things are quite challenging on your fieldwork and mean that you need to take things that you wouldn't maybe necessarily need in Scotland, for instance?
Well, the climate is very, very different to Scotland for a start. So in northern India, it can be very hot because we're not at very high latitudes. And in northern India, it can be very warm, particularly in direct sunlight. And part of that is because we're at really high altitudes. So actually, in the day when you're out in the field and the sun is out, it can be like above 20 degrees. You're in your shorts and t-shirt, and you're putting on the factor 50.
Yeah.
But then as soon as the sun disappears behind the cloud, it can drop by about 20 degrees in a few seconds. So you're suddenly there, like getting out your down jacket, and then the sun comes out again, and you're taking it off again. And the same at night, it can drop below freezing at night. So the kind of extra things we take is, I take a good tent, and a nice warm sleeping bag for at night, really.
So what's the average elevation of your study area?
So the lowest point where the lakes are, they're at 4,500 metres.
Okay.
And the highest points are about 6,200. In terms of where I go to, so I definitely start at 4,500 metres, but that's at the bottom of the valleys, so there's often quite not that much outcrop. So the highest point I got to last year was about 5,200 metres. So.
And getting above 5,000 metres, that's the point where like everything becomes so much harder, and I mean that must have been quite challenging whilst you're trying to sort of figure out what's going on with the rocks around you.
I mean, you notice it at above 3,000 meters really altitude. So the capital city Leh, capital of Ladakh, is at 3,500 meters, and we flew straight into Leh, and we had to spend a few days there acclimatizing. And some people get off the plane and they just think, oh, I've got to lie down, I'm exhausted, this is where I feel awful, I've got a headache. I was okay, actually, surprisingly okay.
That's good.
And spent a few days there, and then the next 1,000 meters makes a big difference. And we drove there gradually, and then spent some days climatizing as well. But the hardest thing I would say is that it's not only is it high altitude, but it's really steep and loose. So all of the ground is just loose scree. So you're standing at the bottom of a valley and you're looking up at a cliff and you think, okay, I want to go and sample some of these rocks. And you think, okay, well, it's a pretty big cliff, but maybe I can get to the bottom of it, which is, some way up a scree slope. And you think, okay, how long will it take me to get there? I think that's about a 40-minute walk. And then about 2 hours later, you're still not there. And it's 2 steps and then a rest, or sometimes 2 steps up and then you slide back down a little bit, and it's quite demoralising because it's hard work on scree, and then you've got the added effect of altitude as well. So
that sounds very, very familiar. I've had exactly the same experience of working out there, like in the Himalaya, and you sat in your camp and you're looking around and you go, oh, that doesn't look too far away. Maybe we can work there today, and then we'll be able to go on to the next bit. And you just have to completely scale back your expectations of what you're going to get done that day, because it just doesn't happen.
I think I was told before I went to think of what you would normally get done on a field campaign for the same length, and I think divided by 3.
Oh, really?
Was the guide.
That sounds, I think that sounds about right, pretty much. And so you had field assistants, I guessed, out with you. Did you also work with any local people, or have any local people come along with you?
Yeah, so in India, although you can actually get self-drive cars, it's not really advised, and I think it's mostly because of the taxi union aren't very happy with kind of foreigners coming in and just renting a car and driving it themselves. So you do most things through the taxi union, and you can get a car and a driver. And actually, I am very happy that I got a driver, because some of the roads that some of the passes we had to drive over were just insane. The highest motorable road in the world we drove over, and I think it was over 5,500 meters. And you wind up this like quite a good road, it's tarmacked, but with big drops either side and big military vehicles and lots of bicycles, because people decided they all want to cycle over this high motorable road. So for the whole trip, I had a car and a driver who came along with us, and he actually was great. He came out, helped us do some hammering, loved using the hammer and chisels, and but we actually also took a cook. I was unsure what kind of stoves I'd be able to get working up at such high altitude, so I decided to rent some out there and ended up with 2 massive like kerosene stoves and lots of fuel, and a local guy who was an amazing cook, but is also a guide. And it was quite nice having him out with us, really, because he could act as a translator. He knew the way around. He could look after the camp. There's lots of livestock there as well. And also, I think just providing like for that just one field season, 3 weeks straight of employment for them is actually really good, especially because the tourist season is so short up there. You've just got basically July and August, and then it starts getting too cold.
And what did they think of your activities and your research? You said that they quite enjoyed hammering.
They did enjoy the hammering. Occasionally we'd get particularly taxi drivers who had some interest in geology, and they'd come to the village and they'd hear that there were some British geologists in the village, and they come and find us to show us their little rock collection that they picked
brilliant.
up. So
that's one of my favourite things actually about going out on geology field work, is picking up pretty rocks for my own collection. Not necessarily just the rocks that I'm choosing to go out and pick up for my research. So you had the people who were working along with you, but were you moving through like villages? Did you get a chance to kind of experience the culture a little bit, as well as sort of being secluded and out in the sticks?
Yeah, so the area we were working, although it's very large, like I mentioned before, there's only actually one village that's there permanently, and a lot of the kind of income it gets is through tourism. Like, a lot of people drive out there, stay one night by the really pretty lake and mountains, and then we'll drive back. And we were only stayed there for a few days, and the rest of the time we were camping throughout the field area, which is mostly, although the villagers are all nomadic people, so I call them villages, but they're not necessarily occupied at any one time, because they obviously move around with their livestock. But it just so happened that I was camping in this one valley. I think there's a small school, a residential school for the children of the nomadic people. and just down the road is another village actually, which is a Tibetan village. So there's a Tibetan children's school there, and we're only about 10 miles from the Tibetan border here. So when the Chinese invaded Tibet, a lot of people fled across the border, and there's a lots of these little villages scattered around. And while I was sat in my tent, I looked out the tent because I heard some noise and thought, oh, not many people around, so what's going on? And I looked over to the road, and there was just a convoy of bicycles, like cycling past. And I couldn't figure out what's going on. I was like, is this the school children? But it kept going and going. There were hundreds of them. And just down the road, this like big tent sprung up, and like there was incense everywhere. I thought, we've got to go and check this out. So we went over, and everyone kept saying, a llama's coming. And we were like, oh, the Dalai Lama? And they're like, well, not the Dalai Lama, but a llama. And it turns out that they're one of the they're like, I guess, head lama from Hemis Monastery was on his way. And the reason he was on his way is because the Hemis Monastery is one of the big monasteries in Ladakh, and every 12 years they have a big celebration, a big Buddhist festival. Mm-hmm. And this wasn't not only the 12th year, but it was the 1000th anniversary of that.
Okay, wow, yeah.
So they were making a big thing of it, and what they were doing is they were actually cycling from Kathmandu to Ladakh over the Himalayas over like 3 months on a pilgrimage, essentially. Pilgrimage by bike. And it was 200 Buddhist nuns.
Oh my goodness.
On bicycles turned up with a big convoy of vehicles that they were driven along with them as well.
That's amazing.
And they just camped there for like 3 or 4 days. And I was literally mapping around them. And at the end of the day, I'd go and watch some Ladakhi dancing, some Tibetan dancing, all like in their traditional dress. So it was really amazing to kind of experience that with really off the tourist route as well.
I mean, a 1 in 1,000 year celebration by the sounds of it, and probably putting the Tour de France to shame. I mean, it's Tour de Himalaya, but with nuns.
With nuns.
That's brilliant. So, what are the most memorable moments, do you think, from your fieldwork?
Well, I definitely had up and down moments. I'd say there was a few days when I was in one valley, which was very complicated structurally, and I was trying to convince myself that I could see things in one direction and I could see it in another direction. And I think at one point I had to walk away and thought, I'm going to take the afternoon off and come back to this tomorrow because I completely confused myself.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say there were any singular eureka moments throughout this fieldwork, but purely for the nature of the terrain and what I was looking at. It was a lot of my eureka moments came later on when I got back to the lab.
Sure.
Because a lot of what I was looking at was the same but slightly different, so it was hard to kind of pick it apart in the field.
Yeah.
Finding outcrops that you knew existed was always a good moment, because you're like, I've seen a picture of this one before, I recognise it from this paper.
Yeah.
It was interesting to kind of see the broad area as well, and how it fitted in. So I think one day I was just got down from a scree slope and was stood by the road, and the one car of the day, drives past, and as it was coming, we were looking at this Jeep going, what does it say on the front of this Jeep? And as it got closer, we were like, oh, it says Geological Survey on it. Right. Oh, is that the Geological Survey of India? And I was like, oh, that's really exciting, and started waving. And I think the car thought we were in trouble or something, so we essentially flagged down this car by waving from excitement. And the car stops, and this guy gets out and goes, is everything okay? Is there anything I can do to help? And I was just like, we're geologists. And he was like, oh, okay, yeah, that kind of makes sense when you meet a geologist in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
So we had a chat with them, and actually they ended up coming back the next day. We told them where they were camping, and they came to find us next day and invited us out to their base, and said, okay, we'll go in, would you like a little field trip of this really great area around where we're staying?
Right.
And they invited us to their house, so we drove out, and the place where we were going was further east than tourists or Westerns are allowed to go. So we had to
Okay.
go beyond the military checkpoint
Yeah.
because we're so close to the Chinese border at this point. And as soon as you go beyond this checkpoint, you start driving past all these military bases. And I was thinking, I'm not meant to be here, you know, and get into this village. And then the village obviously doesn't see many Westerners at all, and it hasn't done for years because
Yeah,
no one's
sure.
allowed that close. So everyone took quite an interest in us, and then we got to go on this great field trip with the Geological Survey of India. So
Oh,
it was
that
really
sounds fantastic. And that's one of, so you saying that reminds me just how funny it is when you go away to these kind of remote regions and you always stumble across other geologists. It seems like no matter where you go.
We actually had a few geologists we bumped into as well. So on that field trip through this valley, we ran into some geologists from another university in India, I can't remember which one, who just happened to know my supervisor. And
Oh, really?
yeah, and there were biologists around doing like sampling, looking at the different flora in the area.
Okay,
So
yeah,
we had
yeah.
a good chat with them. And actually, we were told, although we didn't meet them, that NASA were also working in the field area looking at extreme environments on kind
Oh,
of
brilliant.
Mars-type analogues.
Yeah,
So
okay, yeah.
you always know you've made it when you can say that your field area is an extreme environment.
It's an
So-
extreme environment. Oh, brilliant. So what was the most enjoyable part of your field work? What did you enjoy the most?
Well, I really enjoyed visiting Ladakh as a place. It's not somewhere I've never been to India before. I've never been to the Himalayas, and I was so excited, as you can imagine, as a geologist being able to go to the Himalayas. But Ladakh itself was just such a friendly place.
Yeah.
It's mostly Buddhist, but Muslim as well, and everyone was really friendly. And I got invited to all sorts of Buddhist festivals, to Eid celebrations
Yeah.
as well, and it was just really interesting culturally. A challenge logistically, but everything always works out in the end.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's always the way. So, it sounds, the way you've kind of painted it, it sounds like it's quite a barren landscape. I'm guessing there's not much vegetation up there either.
hardly any life at all, really. And I guess that's why NASA were looking at it
We're
as an
looking
extreme
at it,
environment,
yeah.
looking at, Mars type analogues where you don't have a lot of vegetation, you don't have a lot of water, you don't have a lot of oxygen,
Yeah.
all these kind of
exactly.
things. So it's pretty bleak, but at the same time it's still
Must be beautiful.
mountainous and
Yeah.
big lakes. A lot of animals, really, just not many plants.
Yeah, that was actually my next question. Actually, was did you encounter any interesting wildlife on your trip?
Most of the wildlife I encountered kind of day to day was actually livestock.
Yeah.
So not wildlife as such, but like the nomads had all of their livestock. So possibly my favourite were the Pashmina goats, and they are these tiny little goats, and there'll just be hundreds of them, and it's the beard of the Pashmina goat which makes the Pashmina wool.
Oh, I did
So
not know that.
it's not the rest of them. So
Oh,
pure
okay.
Pashmina is only made from the beard of the goat.
So do they have a little sort of like barber's cut, and then they can go off and like go and graze again? And
I think that they use a lot of the wool from the goats as well,
Okay.
because they have different kind of grades of all this. So you've got
Gradings, okay.
Pashmina, and then cashmere wool is like a next step down, and then they start blending
okay.
them as well, like mixing them with different wools and stuff. There's a lot of yaks as well, and they make shawls and things out of yak wool, which is a lot coarser but
Yeah.
warmer. And
Did you try any yak cheese?
I didn't know. I avoided
yeah.
that.
I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I mean, it's inexperienced, but very chewy.
Yeah.
So not much wildlife to be seen, I
Well,
guess.
actually, so there's a lot. So in terms of wildlife, lots of marmots, so small
Very
small
cute.
rodents. But otherwise, it's mostly birds, a lot of birds, and the bird life is actually very famous in this area. So the lake Somarari is a nature reserve, and so is the big kind of salt lake, and the WWF actually have an office in the tiny village where there's just like a monastery in the middle of nowhere, and it's because on this lake there are 3 breeding pairs of black-necked cranes.
Okay.
And black-necked cranes, they're quite rare. I think their migration route was set up basically before the Himalayas was even there, and they've just kind of carried on going. The Himalayas have gotten in the way, but They're enormous. They're not quite 2 meters, I think. We saw them from quite a distance.
Is that wingspan or
no,
or
height?
Oh,
Height. So the
yeah.
cranes, so they're pretty tall, and they were wading out in the lake, and we weren't allowed to get that close, but we saw all 6 of them.
Yeah.
From the road through binoculars and stuff.
Oh, brilliant.
But yeah, I also saw there's the lammergeiers, a Himalayan bearded vulture,
Okay.
nesting in the cliffs above us, and a golden eagle as well.
Oh, one of my favourites.
And then the other wildlife we saw was actually blue sheep, which is the equivalent of a mountain goat. So we actually nicknamed our driver this, who's coming up and helping us to hammer and then running all over the rocks. We're like, oh, you're like a mountain goat. And he's like, what is mountain goat? It's like, you're a blue sheep. Scaling the cliffs.
I've seen them before, and when people told me about blue sheep, I was expecting them to be kind of like a bright blue. They're not a bright blue, but they're incredibly, I don't know if they were in your field area, but in my area they were just incredibly blended into the hillside. We got them pointed out to us, and they're like, oh, look, the blue sheep. And it took me ages because they just looked like bits of rock just sort of scattered around on the mountainside.
Yeah, I think we heard them before we saw them, because they were right next to our camp, but halfway up a cliff.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just this vertical cliff that they just were somehow scaling.
I mean, that would be useful to be able to do that as a geologist.
I think, get me some samples while you're up there.
From all of this amazing fieldwork that you've been able to do, what do you think was the top thing that you learned from the experience and that you've brought back with you?
Compared to all my other fieldwork that I've done, really, the main difference here, aside from the altitude, was actually just learning to work in that different cultures. So one of the things I've definitely learned about organising anything in India is that no matter who you ask, they will always say yes. They'll always say, yeah, that's fine, no problem, I'll do it. Even if that's not their expertise, they'll just do it, you know?
Yeah.
They're just very kind, very helpful. Even if they say yes and you're thinking, oh, I'm not sure if this is going to happen. It will happen in its own time.
Yeah.
But
no rush.
Yeah, no rush, exactly. So I'm trying to plan my fieldwork this summer back to Ladakh, and I'm trying to organise some extra transport, essentially, away from the roads. So I'm going to be getting some pack horses, and every correspondence I've had with them have been like, yeah, it'll be fine, no problem. Like, the guide will organise it, it's fine. And then the internet will shut down for a month and I'll hear nothing. And the next one's like, yeah, I'll talk to him, it's fine. And it's like, oh, okay.
So you've
not talked to him yet, but it will happen. So, and I think a lot of it, I'm just going to have to turn up in country and then try and
you've got to
sort
have a lot of
things out
trust
once I'm
in the
there.
fact that it's going to work once you're there.
No
Exactly.
problem.
Yeah, no problem. And what is the piece of field equipment that when you're out there you just can't be without?
I'm going to have to say a camera. Not just because I want to take photos of the amazing scenery, although that is true.
Yeah.
But one of the best ways to document what you see and is part of your evidence for your fieldwork is your camera. And there are so many things you just want to remember.
Exactly. Yeah. And a picture speaks 1,000 words.
Yeah.
And I've done the bad thing where I've forgotten to take a photo, and I've gone, oh, I'll remember what I was talking about in my field notebook. And you come back to your notebook maybe even just a month later, and you're reading and you're thinking, I don't really remember what I'm describing there.
And if you just take loads of photos, they could come in useful later. Whereas if you forget, that could be the cost of another flight back to revisit that area.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Just take pictures of everything and anything, and you'll be sorted.
That's a brilliant piece of field kit, and I think pretty much anybody doing any field work, that's going to be really high priority on their list. Do you want to just maybe give some advice to anybody who's been listening and thinking, oh my goodness, geology, that sounds really interesting, and the fieldwork sounds really, really cool, which is very true, it's very cool. Do you want to give some advice to anybody that might want to think about doing geology? Sort of what are your top tips in getting into the subject?
I think just get out there and see things. You don't have to be a geologist to go and see some of these places. Some areas, particularly in the UK, there's really quite a lot of information out there about what you're looking at. But even so, if you go to a mountain belt, for example, go and look at some mountains, then that is a geological story right in front of you. And I think that that's probably what I wrote in my personal statement to get me into university, was just that I went out there and I saw these things and I thought it was cool.
Yeah. It's such an observational science in the kind of the purest sort of in its purest form. It's all about the observations that you're making that you can then think about what your interpretations might be and how this all works and puts together. But I think you're right. If you can go somewhere and if you're enjoying yourself and you're able to take a look at what's around you and notice things, then that's the first step, and you're kind of on your way from there.
And that could be, your local quarry or the building stones
exactly.
or anything.
I mean, fossils is a lot of ways that people got into it, and I think that's probably, I think that was the first time I ever kind of acknowledged that geology was a thing, was when my granddad was taking me fossiling. But there's a surprising amount out there. You just have to.
And it carries on even to beyond when you are a geologist as well. And they say that the more rocks you see, the better geologist you are.
That's a classic, and it's so true. Well, I think that just about wraps up. Is there anywhere that people can go and take a look at what you've been up to? Maybe a Twitter account they can follow, or?
Yeah, so through our environmental sciences division at Oxford University, we have a blog which is set up by PhD students, and it's where we write short blogs about our fieldwork or about a day in the life of a metamorphic petrologist, but right across the whole of environmental science. And you can find that on changingtheclimateblog.wordpress.com.
Brilliant. And can they follow you on Twitter as well?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at AK Bidgood.
Great. So guys, go ahead and check out that blog. It sounds fantastic. I think I'm going to be logging onto the internet and giving that a look just now. And thank you so much, Anna, for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure, and it's been so interesting to hear all about your work out in the Himalaya, and it makes me want to go back again very, very soon, hopefully. And good luck with your fieldwork in the future. When is it that you go?
In July.
Oh my goodness, so soon. You probably will be already on your fieldwork by the time this goes up, but there we go. So thank you all for listening today. It's been another episode of Fieldwork Diaries. You can check out our website, which is www.fieldworkdiaries.com, and visit our Twitter, which is @fieldworkdiary. Thank you very much for listening. My name's Eleni Wood. Goodbye. Fieldwork Diaries is produced at the Open University, and it wouldn't be possible without the amazing people behind the scenes. Music was written and recorded by the wonderful Matt Kent, and fellow fieldwork and podcast enthusiast Stacey Phillips has made us a beautiful website at fieldworkdiaries.com. Check out our Twitter @fieldworkdiary and Instagram Fieldwork Diaries for live updates.